Chapter 1. Doughnut Economics, Theory and Practice. The concept of the doughnut economy is attracting increasing interest among third sector organizations and social movements, but it also raises a number of questions and requires clarification, especially among the younger generations. What is it and how has it developed? This chapter describes its history and reviews its foundations. 1.1 Where do we come from? The idea of planetary boundaries, although known earlier, did not gain recognition until the 1960s, when a wave of new authors warned about the impossibility of sustaining continuous levels of economic growth. These concerns and studies were particularly influential in the famous report, Limits to Growth, commissioned from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology by the Club of Rome, published in 1972 and produced by 17 professionals. Prominent among them was the biophysicist and environmental scientist Donella Meadows, and her husband Dennis Meadows, which is why the report is sometimes also known as the Meadows Report. This topic also appears in a collection of writings by the Romanian mathematician and economist Nicholas Georgescu Roegen, 1906–1994. This scientist was one of the first to introduce the natural sciences into economics, and argued that constantly increasing the size of the economy is impossible, because it is contrary to the laws of nature. Based on both evolutionary biology and thermodynamics, he argued that production should be considered an extension of biological evolution, and as such, should obey the laws of thermodynamics. From this perspective, economic growth accelerates entropy, and at some point, acts as a constraint on primary production. His contributions are important because, perhaps for the first time, he wrote openly about the absurdity of growth ad infinitum in a finite world, and hence the need to replace traditional economics with a bioeconomics, or in other words, the need to weave ties between the economy and the biosphere. Over the following decades, the movement itself loses momentum, merging with the European growth of green and environmental policy, which, however, is eventually seen as ineffective. Since then, the discourse of resource scarcity has continued to develop and is also found in similar philosophies in other parts of the world, such as the concept of buon vivere in Latin America, eco-swaraj or radical ecological democracy in India. Ubuntu in South Africa, or indigenous beliefs applied to the discourse of degrowth in Australia, including the basis of human well-being, in its more holistic view, beyond capital accumulation and technological gadgets, encompassing the community and emotional aspect, or indigenous beliefs applied to the discourse of degrowth in Australia. They all include as a basis human well-being, equity and justice, governance based on direct participation, solidarity or the dignity of labor. The doughnut economy is also marked by the biophysical limits of the planet that must not be exceeded in order to avoid taking vital risks for the community. 1.2 Doughnut economy. What is it? This concept was introduced by the British economist Kate Raworth, in her book Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, in 2017. The theory argues that 20th century economic thinking is ill-equipped to deal with the 21st century reality. That is a planet on the brink of climate collapse. Rather than equating a growing GDP, gross domestic product, with a successful society, our aim should be to fit all human life into what Raworth calls the sweet spot between the social base and the environmental ceiling. In general, people in rich countries live above the environmental ceiling. Those in poorer countries often fall below the social floor. The space in between, that is the doughnut. The theory is so named because it is visually represented by 2 doughnut-shaped discs. The one in the center is the social base, which includes basic fundamental rights, and the outer ring is the ecological ceiling, which cannot be exceeded. In the middle is the space in which humanity can thrive, if the limits of the planet are respected. Both circles coincide with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs of the United Nations. In fact, Christina Gallek, a member of the UN team that in 2015 launched the Sustainable Development Goals, recalled, during a speech at the National Environment Congress in 2018, that the SDG logo owes its circular shape precisely to Raworth's theory presented earlier in an article, in 2012. What are the limits of the doughnut model? Economist Kate Raworth used the 9 environmental thresholds that must not be exceeded described by Johan Rockström in 2009 to avoid a further natural degradation that would further compromise the health of the planet. Climate change. Loss of biodiversity. Ocean acidification. Land conversion. freshwater extraction, loads of nitrogen and phosphorus, chemical pollution, air pollution, and the depletion of the ozone layer. In turn, there are 12 social goals essential for humanity to prosper, many of which are basic human rights. Food security, decent incomes, water and sanitation, health, education, energy, gender equality, resilience, political participation, rent and work, networks, and access to housing. Doughnut and COVID-19. A practical example of implementation. In April 2020, during the first wave COVID-19 wave, the Amsterdam city government announced that it would recover from the crisis and avoid future catastrophes by implementing Kate Raworth's idea. Amsterdam, the Dutch capital, was the first city in the world to make an official commitment to the doughnut economy. "I think it can help us overcome the effects of the crisis," said the mayor of Amsterdam, Marieke van Doornik, in an interview for The Guardian. The central premise was simple: the goal of economic activity should be to meet the basic needs of all people, but within the available resources of the planet. When we suddenly have to worry about climate, health, jobs, housing, care and communities, is there a framework that can help us with all of that? Raworth added, "Yes, there is. And it is ready to go." Amsterdam's ambition was, therefore, to bring the 872,000 residents within the safe space of the doughnut. That is, ensuring they have access to a good quality of life, while doing so in a sustainable way and without putting further pressure on the planet. Guided by Raworth's organization, Doughnut Economics Action Lab, DEAL, the city is introducing massive infrastructure projects, new employment schemes and novel public policies and contracts, keeping the philosophy of the doughnut economy in mind. Van Doornik explains what and how this is being done using the housing crisis as an example. In Amsterdam, almost 20% of tenants are unable to meet their basic needs after paying rent, and only 12% of approximately 60,000 applicants for social housing succeed. A simple solution could be to build more housing, but the Amsterdam doughnut model highlights that carbon dioxide emissions from the urban area are already 31% above 1990 levels. Therefore, Van Doornik says that the municipality planned regulations for the construction of such housing, to ensure the use of recycled and natural materials, such as wood. The doughnut does not bring us the answers, but a new way of looking at the problem we have, so that we don't remain in the same structures as before, she said. On the other hand, Elektra Kulumpi, senior strategist at Circle Economy, says the Amsterdam example is learning by doing. They are very interested in experimenting. Creating this process of bringing the doughnut to the city means taking a conceptual and theoretical model into practice, and turning it into a tool for decision-making and design. And that happens in a participatory format. Without losing sight of the great importance of civic movements, on the other hand, some 400 individuals and local organizations have established a network called the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition, to run their own programs of activism and self-organization of neighborhoods, families, and collectives. Part of the challenge will be to make companies more socially focused, says Druin. We can't transform the system when companies still rely on shareholder investment, which is primarily based on money rather than purpose. Creating public awareness will also be a challenge, she says. How can we become a city based on the doughnut economy if my neighbor hasn't heard of it, or doesn't understand why it is relevant for her? Why should people care about a new economic model when they are struggling to pay their rent or send their children to school? In the end, we need a co-created dream, says Druin, something we can look forward to, something where no one is left behind, neither the people nor the planet. That's what has attracted so many people to the doughnut model in the first place. The model is powerful because it is simple and it speaks to everyone, says Kulumpi. The problem is how to bring those people together. This is a very mixed group. Raworth says a lot of it comes down to communication, changing minds one at a time. It seems like it could take forever to shift paradigms, Raworth says, but in one individual, it could happen in the blink of an eye. The world is experiencing a series of shocks and surprising impacts that allow us to move away from the idea of growth towards thriving. Says Raworth, thriving means that our well-being is in balance. We know this very well at the level of our body. This is the moment when we are going to connect bodily health with planetary health. Amsterdam was the pioneer city, but certainly not the only one. Deal has received a flood of applications from various municipalities and other entities seeking to build more resilient societies after COVID-19. The municipality of Copenhagen decided to follow the example of Amsterdam already in June 2020, as well as the Brussels region, the small city of Dunedin, New Zealand, in September 2020, Nanaimo, British Columbia, in December 2020, and many more around the world. In order to incorporate the Doughnut economy into their urban management models, cities need to answer the following questions. Objective: what or whom does the city serve? Networks: how is the city using its purchasing power and networks? Governance: how is the city governed? Who is included in decision-making processes? Property: who owns the city's sources of wealth? Finance: is finance at the service of the city or the city at the service of finance? How can our city be the home where people thrive, respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the entire planet? This can be done through four crucial lenses that arise from the combination of two domains, the social and the ecological, and two scales, the local and the global. Another practical example that emerged during the pandemic context, and that is based on the Doughnut economy, is the document of the WEAll initiative, the Wellbeing Alliance, a collaboration of organizations, alliances, movements and individuals working for an economy of human and ecological well-being. This paper collected the following principles based on the Doughnut economy, as a practical framework to guide their work. The authors describe each of the principles as follows. 1. New objectives: ecologically safe and environmentally fair. Prioritize long-term human well-being and ecological stability in all decision-making. Downscale and disinvest from economic sectors that do not contribute to ecological and well-being goals. Invest in those that do. Facilitate a just transition for everyone, that creates jobs. 2. Protection of environmental standards. Protect all existing climate policies and emission reduction targets, environmental regulations and policies, in all responses to COVID-19. 3. Green and provisioning infrastructure. Develop new green infrastructures and provisioning, and sustainable social practices as part of COVID-19 recovery. For example, transform cities into car-free urban spaces, expand public transport, green energy, environmentally sustainable food production, low-carbon housing, apply environmental conditions to bailouts of carbon-intensive industries. 4. Universal basic services. Ensure that the needs of everyone are met, including free-of-charge health coverage for the entire population, at the point of access, free universal provision or vouchers for basic levels of water, electricity, gas, housing, food, mobility and education. 5. Guaranteed livelihoods. Ensuring that everyone has the means to live decently, for example, through income and/or job guarantees, or the redistribution of employment, through a reduced working time. 6. Fair distribution. Create more equal societies nationally and globally, through a fair distribution of resources and opportunities. For example, more progressive and environmentally oriented income and wealth taxes, public, common ownership of key resources and infrastructure. 7. Better democracy. Ensure effective, transparent and inclusive democratic processes, at all levels, end regulatory capture by corporate interests and corruption. 8. Economic welfare organizations. Prioritize social and ecological objectives in all companies and organizations. Implement circular economy principles to minimize resource use and waste. Ensure economic and organizational democracy. 9. Cooperation. Ensure cooperation and solidarity, at all levels, including in international politics and the global economy, across industry sectors and government ministries, at all scales, global, national, regional and local. 10. Public control of money. Introduce public and democratic control of money creation. Spend newly created money on investments that promote social and environmental objectives. Another practical example was proposed by the French economist Serge Latouche, when talking about degrowth, a sibling concept of the Doughnut economy, with its famous 8 Rs, which symbolize 8 interdependent actions and objectives. 1. Re-evaluate. That is, diagnose society and promote new values, such as cooperation versus competition, enjoyment versus obligation or workaholism, humanism versus consumerism, etc. 2. Reconceptualizing. In other words, finding new ways of interpreting reality and success that would translate into redefining concepts such as wealth and poverty, or scarcity and abundance. 3. Restructuring. Both society and production, in accordance with the new values established. 4. Relocate. And give more value to the local, especially in terms of meeting basic needs. 5. Redistribution. Which would mean a new organization of the distribution of goods. 6. Reduce. Above all, the impact of economic activity, which is an expansive consumer of the biosphere, but also of working hours and mass tourism. 7. Reuse. Linked to the attempt to extend the useful life of products and put an end to the irrational programmed obsolescence. 8. Recycle. Mainly based on the principles of the circular economy. This basic list, as yoUTh himself points out, could be extended, and indeed is often enriched with various proposals, such as radicalize, reconvert, reinvent, especially democracy, resize, reduce speed, relax, resign, rethink, etc., but all these terms are usually somehow encompassed in the main list. The prefix re in the 8 proposed measures has been criticized as reactionary, or even romantic and nostalgic in its yearning to go back in time. However, yoUTh explains that if there is in it an element of reaction, it is only against the system of excesses and arrogance reflected in what Jean-Paul Besset denounces as the over. Even in English, there is a possible wordplay with over, the leftovers, what is left over, as for example, overdevelopment, overproduction, overextraction, overfishing, overconsumption, overpackaging, overindebtedness, and along etc. Moreover, an implicit value of the Cultural Revolution of the 8 R can be reduced to a single word, whose meaning will be elaborated in more detail in the next chapter: resist. In short, the Doughnut economy has given yoUTh some high-profile admirers. Pope Francis endorsed it, while the celebrated British naturalist Sir David Attenborough devoted a chapter to it in his latest book, A Life on Our Planet, calling it our species' compass for the journey to a sustainable world. 1.3 Doughnut economy. Why? Both ecology and economy derive from the Greek word oikos, meaning household, and although both terms imply a form of household management, they seem to be increasingly distant. The present guide, through an attempt to highlight and weave threads between the idea of the Doughnut economy and the informal and non-formal education work of social economy entities, questions the increasingly obsolete dominant economic and social thinking, in the face of the multiple crises that affect our societies and the planet, nowadays. It also invites us to discuss the potential of the Doughnut economy movement, empowered through social economy entities, such as our associations, as we will explain below. As the social scientist and philosopher Karl Polanyi, 2001 said, the economic system is a component of human culture, and as the human culture, it is in a constant state of evolution. And so it should be, one might add, and in a very urgent way, as our planet and society require it. It is enough to look at recent events, the increasingly recurrent phenomena of climate change, the alarming reports of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Expert Panel on Climate Change, the assaults on democracy, the loss of biodiversity resulting in the emergence of pandemics, or the serious shortcomings of our current modus operandi in the social, food, energy, economic or educational networks. The growth of the abstract gross domestic product number is not what people are after when they talk about growth. It is, however, the desire to be able to consume or acquire more, which requires the use of more raw materials and energy, although this is not often stated outright when talking about economic growth. Without getting into the debate about the new proposals for measuring human prosperity or abundance, the anthropologist Jason Hickel goes so far as to call the preoccupation with GDP a fetish, which obscures the fact that growth is material. In this sense, the Doughnut economy, with its focus on reducing the use of materials, energy and patterns of commodification mentioned above, becomes a concept that demystifies and even changes the meaning of growth today. Changes in our pattern of living and in the management of the scarce resources seem inevitable. The only question is whether they will continue to occur in the form of a chaotic response to unexpected disruptions. We live in times of perpetual crisis, which can only take the form, hopefully, of a carefully planned transition into a socio-economic model that operates within the physical limits of a finite planet, and must do so based on solidarity and ethics. This guide will, therefore, deepen knowledge by reviewing data, contrasting previous knowledge, and exploring a new approach, proposing social economy entities as potential partners in an attempted process of transition to a new socio-economic model. It will have a value in providing a synthesis of theoretical aspects related to the economy of the doughnut and the role played in it by the third sector. 1.4 Who needs it the most? Crises bring changes. Crises bring hope. Crises bring the process of catharsis, faster and deeper. However, let us keep in mind Karaka's warning about the Chinese saying, crisis also means opportunity, which today is becoming a crisis for the majority and opportunity for a few. Why does the doughnut economy embrace both environmental and social aspects? The pandemic year, 2020, was a clear example of this. While global extreme poverty is estimated to increase for the first time in 20 years just in 2020 because of the AIDS-19 pandemic, in addition to the conflicts and climate change that were already counteracting efforts to reduce it, the World Bank Group, 2020, more than 60% of the world's billionaires have increased their wealth. Tesla's Elon Musk and Amazon's Jeff Bezos lead the list. In a tragic year for the vast majority of humanity, the latter's wealth has grown by 63.3% compared to 2019, BBC, 2020. The doughnut economy can give a role to the social economy in the better distribution of goods. Let's face it. Not all of humanity is equally responsible for the current crisis, and the crisis that lies ahead. Oxfam's most recent report is even more devastating. Just 8 men in fact already own the same wealth as 3.6 billion people, the poorest half of humanity. Between 1990 and 2015, the richest 10% of the world's population generated 52% of carbon emissions, consuming almost a third, 31% of the global carbon budget. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% of the world's population generated only 7% of emissions, consuming only 4% of the carbon budget, and only the richest 1% of the world's population generated 15% of cumulative emissions, and consumed 9% of the carbon budget, twice as much as the poorest half of the world's population. Moreover, as seen before, the current economic system is not only responsible for the financial and social inequality, but also for the environmental degradation and thus, the environmental injustice. Similarly, the environment is still considered valuable only for the economic demands it meets through a kind of green capitalism, obsessed with technological advancement. Many very polluting industries and their environmental impacts have been transferred to the global south. Progress has turned out to be retrogressive, as the capitalist logic of the global north cannot but exploit nature. The term environmental justice, therefore, refers to movements around the world that fight against the unequal allocation of environmental hazards and climate racism. As Martinez Alia reminds us, campaigns carried out by environmental justice organizations in southern countries, against ecologically unequal exchange and ecological debt, and social movements within the framework of the doughnut economy should be combined. The problem of the global north is that it produces and consumes more than it needs, at the expense of the south, the environment and the future generations. Moreover, in the collective imagination, economic growth is seen as a solution to poverty and inequality. However, in wealthy nations, crime, disease, especially mental illness, drug abuse and other undesirable side effects increase as fast as their wealth, if measured by GDP. So, it is proper redistribution and not growth that improves well-being. The economics of the doughnut, therefore, speaks about policies for the redistribution of resources, for the benefit of the disadvantaged and, as we will underline below, as a clear challenge to the prevailing capitalist order. In the countries of the North, these policies should advocate, for example, the establishment of a basic, universal, unconditional and individual citizenship income, which would increase the possibilities of the most disadvantaged. Some have even advocated in parallel, the establishment of a maximum authorized income. Measures should also be encouraged that take into account, in a central place, the improvement of the standard of living of the inhabitants of poor countries, always on the basis, of course, of the defensive formulas that do not reproduce the developmentalist and productivist models that are in crisis in the North. The doughnut economy supports the vision of social justice as a core value, especially in terms of distributive, but also environmental, justice. How could it be achieved? A society guided by these ideas would have to build new processes and institutions to collectively choose how to allocate its resources to meet the basic needs and forms of compensation. This in itself is not at all a new and therefore radical concept. In fact, societies used to implement it for centuries, before the Industrial Revolution. Examples? The French term dépense refers to the spending of society's surplus beyond what is necessary to satisfy essential human needs. As Callies recalls, in ancient Egypt the surplus was spent on building the pyramids, the Tibetans left it for the monks. In the medieval Europe it was given to churches, while today's capitalist civilization invests it in producing even more growth. The new economies, however, propose that citizens devise new ways of managing this surplus, ways that help build community and care for the environment, ways that in the strict economic sense are apparently unproductive, but that take capital out of the vicious circle of growth and generate good quality living, as we shall see below. 1.5 The role of social economy entities and non-formal and informal education. In the sense of redistribution of goods, social economics deals with the principles and regularities of the distribution of the part of the national income that goes to the population, and discusses economic phenomena from the point of view of contributing to social and individual well-being. Narski, 2009. Why? We are going to focus on their role in offering people from all walks of life the opportunity to return to society, since for various reasons they have been excluded from it previously. The main idea of social economy organizations is to put people before profit maximization. What does this mean? Social economy organizations allocate surpluses to the activation of people excluded by society. In conditions where the state loses its geopolitical importance to global corporations and companies and local markets are marginalized, the importance of the third sector paradoxically increases. Social economy organizations provide satisfaction to their employees, or members and volunteers, and evoke a sense of self-fulfillment and satisfaction. This educational and socializing role of the social economy towards the sphere of social exclusion and discrimination cannot be underestimated. The market will not fulfill the latter function. Teresa Crespo, in her article, A New Relationship Between the Third Sector and the Social Economy, also stresses that a cohesive society, apart from the sense of belonging to a community, enjoys a minimum equitable redistribution of resources. Consequently, whenever work is done to build a fairer and less exclusive society, greater cohesion will be achieved among the population, and to the extent that it generates economic resources that are distributed according to the redistributive justice criteria of social entities, it benefits a greater number of the population, such as staff, volunteers, and all the people who receive care or help. In terms of environmental and social justice, Natale recommends reflecting on the following three issues. 1. To analyze the role of power in shaping the psyche and social behavior. 2. To alternate between theory and practice. 3. To emphasize that action cannot just be a matter of individual interest. Social economy organizations have these three ideas embedded in their very genetics and construction. As they offer a more horizontal or shared distribution of power, they act in theoretical and practical fields and focus on the collective. An example of these are savings and credit cooperatives that avoid the conventional model of a bank. They are based on the model of a collective that pools its resources with the right to borrow from this group, according to its needs. Also, another benefit of these cooperatives operating at the local or regional level is the fact that savings are reinvested locally. It is also worth noting the democratic self-governance and the fact that credit unions are less involved in the pressure to grow money, which is one of the main drivers of economic growth. Another example would be the entities that make up the third social sector, which are voluntary and non-profit entities, and whose aim is promoting the fulfillment of social rights and a more inclusive society, with less poverty and exclusion. This also includes international cooperation and environmental organizations. According to the report Radiography of the Third Social Sector in Spain, Challenges and Opportunities in a Changing Environment, 2018, the significance of this sector in Spain is reflected in the almost 30,000 entities that make it up, which cover the needs of the most vulnerable. More than 7 million people are attended annually, by more than 2 million people, including volunteers and employees. Many of these people have needs that, without the growing presence of the third social sector, would be at risk of not being met, especially in times of crisis, when its importance is even greater. And although the social economy becomes an object of interest of public policies due to, among other things, its greater scope of work in the field of marginalized population and at risk of social exclusion, public funding for social action experienced a slowdown in 2017, with a decrease of more than 2%. This type of initiative also has a systemic disadvantage, since its social profitability is a concept that is difficult to measure in economic terms, but which, more importantly, represents one of the basic elements of the social economy. This responsibility is assessed through the impact of the actions carried out by the entities in order to help provide a service, support, information, or training to people, with the aim of increasing their well-being, their autonomy and, in short, their integral development as responsible citizens. Finally, the role of redistribution in the energy and other resource crises will be a difficult task. A task that few are considering and hardly talked about, although the recent pandemic crisis may have served as a trailer for what is to come, e.g., the shortage of medical equipment and the difficult question of who to allocate it to. How will resources be allocated and how will an attempt be made to maintain a balance? As Pratt says, quoting the Fuhem Foundation, famous for its educational work and search for alternatives, what is more democratic? That each person consumes resources according to their spending capacity and individual freedom? Or that collective thresholds are established that limit individual decisions in the search for a more equitable distribution of the impact? Who establishes the threshold of what is necessary, and how? The role of social economy organizations here also lies, once again, in the role of educating and raising awareness among citizens, who still do not listen to the voices of scientists and environmentalists, without demanding changes with the depth, seriousness, and speed that are required. As Jorge Reachman says when he quotes Francisco Chico Walter, "I don't think this is a battle of the 99% against the 1% of the powerful, as Occupy Wall Street advocated. It is a struggle of the 1% of critics so that the 98% wake up and together we fight the other 1% who run the system." Practical exercise. Instructions: ask the young people participating in the activity to write on small pieces of paper different social groups, such as people with disabilities or reduced mobility, LGBTQ+, refugees, migrants, students, unemployed, single parents, etc. Depending on the group we work with, we can also ask them for more concrete roles, so that it is easier to work, or prepare them yourself beforehand. Then, each person will take a piece of paper and everyone will stand in a straight line. We will ask them several questions about possible activities within society. Whenever participants with their assigned role answer yes, they should take a step forward. For example, we can ask, can you vote in the European Parliament elections? Can you stand as a candidate in local elections? Can you travel around Europe? Can you marry the person you want and live without prejudice or fear? Do you have problems making ends meet? Is it easier for you to find a job or a flat to rent? Do you have family around that you can count on, etc.? After a few questions, we will see different positions in the room, which in some way represent different positions in society, according to each group's privileges, etc. This is a good starting point to get the young participants to think about the topic of active participation, and the different roles of people in society. Normally, a discussion would arise naturally, but if not, we can also ask them the following questions. What does it mean to be an active citizen? Why is it important to be an active citizen? How can young people become more active in society? Do you consider yourself an active person? In what way? How can we ensure that all people have an equal chance to take part in society as an active citizen? To speed up the discussion, we can also choose some controversial statements or quotes on the topic of active participation, and place them on different, larger sheets of paper in the center of the room. For example, we can write, "One vote won't change anything. There is no chance of changing communities. Voting is enough for having an active participation. Young people have no chance to change anything. Immigrants should not have the right to stand as candidates in elections." Ask participants to read silently for a while and to, afterwards, write their opinions on the sheets of paper. Then, give them again some free time for everyone to read what has been written in the papers, and the different opinions can be discussed in a circle, as a final debate.